I'd just like to make a very warm welcome from Bradinghaven to our World War II veterans, of which I'm particularly pleased because we are fellow Royal Navy veterans. And Alec Penstone, and you'll hear all about him very shortly from James. But he has survived both the Arctic convoys and the D-Day invasion and many other escapades. So I'm very proud to introduce him through James to you tonight.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, good evening, everybody. Let me introduce the members of our team who are here, first of all. Along at the far end of the table is Tanya, who is the co-author of the book about Alec's life with me. And here is her husband, George, who goes on as Alec's companion on his various escapades when he goes to France for D-Day, things like that. And of course the man himself, sitting here.
We're here losing some shipmates I'm pretty sure are still around for the Royal Navy, and it's my absolute pleasure to meet all you wonderful people who want to hear whatever happened to me, because I think it was quite a mundane story, but my friends decided that there was a story to tell, and over the years they've gone on, they've worked wonders by presenting me with a book of all things. But I've been very, very lucky. These wonderful people are my friends, and I thank you all very much indeed for honouring me by coming here tonight. Thank you.
Yes, so we've produced a book which is 150 pages long and covers all of Alec's life, from when he was a little boy up until quite recently. Whilst we were preparing the book, which took us about 14 months, can you hear me, Alec, when I'm talking?
Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. I can't hear you behind.
All right.
Okay.
Well, in that case, I'll speak without the microphone, I think. Alec lives in Shanklin. He's now 98 years old and will be 99 in about 8 weeks' time, 23rd of April, St. George's Day. He has recently, last June, come back from France, where he went with George, and he is one of the last survivors of D-Day. He's also one of the last survivors of the Arctic convoys, and we believe is the last survivor living on the Isle of Wight from the Pacific theatre of war against the Japanese. The two of them went over to France last year. They had a chauffeur drive them around, and it turned out that he was the grandson of Viscount Monty, and they all got on very well. Alec went down in a storm with the French. He was dancing with the vicar on one occasion. He was chatting to anybody he could find. And you got a situation this last year where there were only 15 veterans who could make the journey. And of those 15, only 7 could still walk. And Alec is one of the 7. And he told me afterwards that he realised, talking to the others, he was the only one who was actually there on D-Day itself, the 6th of June. All the others arrived in follow-up days. So he also intends to go to D-Day this year, and this year will be the last year they have a D-Day celebration, because it will be the 80th. And oh, are they right? Thank you. So he's determined to go. I said to him a couple of weeks ago, don't you think, Alec, that it's going to be a bit much for you to be over there for a few days this year? You know, should you really think about it? And his reply was, I'll swim across if need be. If necessary. I'll swim across if necessary. So we've got the book, which we sell for £15. And whilst we were preparing the book, which took us about 14 months, several museums got in touch with us and said, it was very interesting to read this story, but what we really like to do is hear him talking. So Penny, who is videoing us this evening, was brought in because she's a rather expert video maker, and we produced a DVD which we supplied to museums, and the book and the DVD are now part of the Oxford University Theirs is the Glory project. We're videoing tonight, as has been mentioned, and the intention is, if I don't make a complete Horlicks of the evening, is to upload the video to YouTube so that people all over the country who contacted us will be able to look at it and view it for free, because we've had people from Scotland, from all over. We've even had somebody from Argentina contact us who met Alec several years ago on one of his Freedom Bridge, I think it was, and he asked us to send some material and said he's got an Instagram account in Spanish specialising in the Second World War, and we sent material over to him, and he came back and said, oh, I didn't mention I've got 62,000 followers. So we were quite pleased with that. Alec was 14 when the Second World War broke out. Oh, sorry, can I just say, and the DVD is £10. Alec was 14 when the Second World War broke out, and he was living in Tottenham, North London, with his family. His father died a few months before, having been badly injured in the First World War. And he'd got Alec to promise him that if a war came, and it was becoming obvious it was going to come, that he wouldn't go into the army, he wouldn't go into the trenches. And Alec gave him that promise. There are several quite good stories of Alec's time in 1939, 1940. But I'm going to concentrate on just one of them so we can go on to the Arctic Convoys. And that is, Alec joined the ARP, Air Raid Precaution, and fire watching, and was out at night looking after houses around Tottenham. And there was one particular day when the Battle of Britain was going on in the sky above, and all our fighters and the German bombers were all interweaving. So the Yak guns couldn't fire because they would risk hitting our own planes. And Alec was going down to Tottenham on some errand. And as he went down, he suddenly saw one of the German planes break away and started to come down and started to attack Finsbury Park Station. And Alec sheltered under a railway tunnel just across the road. And this plane came down, attacked the station, then went along, attacked a train, and then turned and started to machine gun all the Saturday afternoon shoppers who were out there. What he hadn't realised, and Alec didn't realise, was that under one of these tunnels was a Bofors gun. And a Bofors gun is a low-level anti-aircraft gun. And they fired and hit the plane. And as Alec stood there, he saw the pilot turn the plane and start to go upwards with it, with smoke streaming out of the back of the plane. And he realised that what the pilot was going to do, or was trying to do, was to get enough height that he could jump out with his parachute. Alec, knowing the locality, realised there was only one place that the pilot could land, and that was Markfield Recreation Centre, which was the only bit of greenery there was around. And as he watched, he saw the pilot come out, and he saw the parachute open. And Alec, as he'd done on a number of occasions, when there's danger, he runs towards it instead of away from it, like the rest of us would do, or I would. And he could see the pilot parachuting down, and he got on his bike. He got a fixed wheel bike, so it was hard work going up hills, and when you came downhill you had to put your legs out, the pedals would keep turning. And off he went to go to Markfield Recreation Ground. He saw a policeman on the way, and he shouted to the policeman, "He's going to Markfield Recreation Ground." And the policeman said, "Right." And the policeman went off. And the policeman had got a rather better bike. So Alec was lagging behind. He got to the recreation ground a couple of minutes after the policeman. And there he saw the most amazing sight. The German was standing there with his parachute on the ground, looking absolutely stunned as 20 or 30 people fought over the silk of his parachute. And Alec saw the policeman take the gun out. Are you following any of this?
Yes, I
Oh,
am.
well done.
I'm living it.
Yeah. Well, you did live it, yeah. So he saw the policeman take the gun out, empty the bullets out, put one bullet back in, and pointed at the airman, as if to say, put your hands behind your back, you're my prisoner. And to their astonishment, the airman suddenly, in a beautiful Oxford English accent, said, "I'm a prisoner of war and I demand respect." And Alec and the policeman looked at each other and said, where did that voice come from? And it turned out he'd gone to Oxford University before the war. Anyway, they managed to load him into a sidecar, and the police took him off. And that left Alec with the unenviable task of having to push the policeman's bike and his own 1.5 miles uphill. And he wasn't very pleased about it. So I think now we'll wind the clock forward to when Alec's 18, 1943. He decides shortly after his 18th birthday he's going to join the Navy. So he went along for his medical, and he described it as 3 coughs and you're in. They were so desperate to have that. And he joined. He had his basic training. Then he went to Scotland for some submarine practice, and they asked him what he wanted to do, and he decided he would be an ASDIC operator. That's Anti-Submarine Investigative ASDIC, Anti-Submarine Detection Investigation Committee. And he paid a bit more, so he said, I'll go for that. So what that meant was he was trained to sit with the headphones on the ship, listening for U-boats and torpedoes. And he had to be able to distinguish between fresh water, salt water, shoals of fish. So he had his training. And then after his towards the end of his training, he was sent down to the Gosport water tower that we all see. And this is a story for the men, really, which I appreciate. And Alec had to learn how to escape from a sinking vessel. And they put him in, he said it was like a coffin, really, very narrow. And he had to let the water equalise. And it got up to there, he had to put clips on his nose, step out, and he shot 60 feet up to the surface. Whereupon he discovered a naval rating who got a bill hook, double-edged, which he thrust between his legs and gave him a great pull. And Alec said it was agony. He had to hold on to it for dear life while he was pulled out. And you were like a fish that had been landed at that point. So then they said to, I think perhaps I ought to give you a bit of background about the Arctic Convoys. Why did we have the Arctic Convoys and what were they? The Germans had invaded Russia, and in 1941 the Russians were on the point of collapse. The Germans had got to within 15 miles of Moscow, and Stalin sent a message to Churchill, and he said, unless you can give us immediate supplies. Can you hear me at the back all right?
Yes, you
can.
can.
Unless you give us immediate supplies, we're going to lose. Churchill thought to himself, quite rightly, if the Russians lose, it's going to free up all the German troops to come back and attack us. So Churchill agreed they must send supplies. They couldn't go through the Mediterranean to the Black Sea because the Germans occupied quite large parts of the Mediterranean. The other way would be to go all the way round to Vladivostok, the far side of Russia, but that would take too long. So they realised the quickest and most direct route was to go from south of Iceland, across up through the Arctic Circle, Norway occupied by the Germans, over Norway and down to Murmansk. So that's what they decided to do. And the first ones, and what they would do is they would get 20 or 30 merchant ships, loaded up with tanks, anything. They needed everything, ammunition, planes, you name it, the Russians needed it. And they would get these 20 to 30 and sometimes up to 40 vessels. They would surround them with warships as best they could, and they would all set off. But the conditions they were setting off into were horrendous, absolutely horrendous. You had 6 months of darkness in which they could sail around, and it was more difficult for the Germans to find them. Or you could have 6 months of continuous daylight, which was dangerous because the Germans could find them. The sea conditions were unbelievable. If you fell into the sea, you froze to death within 2 or 3 minutes. The temperatures were minus 40 to 50 degrees centigrade. There was a real problem with ice. The ice was such that they had to spend quite a lot of their time hacking the ice off, and I'll show you a bit later on some photographs of the ice. It was so cold that if you touched anything that was metal, you stuck to it, and your hand was damaged. In fact, Alec tells the story of one occasion when a chap was about to be swept overboard and he slapped his hands down on the deck and froze. And his hands were quite badly damaged, but at least he was still alive. Oh yes. Oh, we've got a slide of that. So Alec went for having passed through the gospel system. Alec was told to report up in Scapa Flow for service, and he went up and discovered that he was being put on a submarine. And he thought, this was madness. I'm an ASDIC operator. I should be on a ship detecting submarines. So he said to the officer, who was a chap about his age, I'm an ASDIC operator. I shouldn't be on a submarine. And he said, well, bad luck, son. Take it up with whoever ordered you if we get back. Now he said, well, if we get... He said, yeah, we're off to Murmansk at 1800 hours tonight. And Alec thought to himself, that's me done for. Churchill described it as the worst journey in the world. And Alec thought my naval career is going to be pretty short. This submarine was a 1914-18 submarine and wasn't fit for purpose. It had got a 4-inch gun, which they were told not to fire because it might shatter the structure, and they didn't have any shells for. And they were told not to dive below 60 feet because they thought it wasn't safe. So they made their way up to Iceland, where everybody got together, and they stayed on the surface. Shortly after Iceland, they decided to have a test dive. They got down 30 feet, and Alec said water was coming from everywhere. It was coming through rivets and everywhere. He said, and we had to, it's obviously a naval place, he said we had to come up in a ruddy blush, very quick. He said, had that seawater got into the batteries, they would have all suffered from chlorine poison. Yeah, I think it is. So the captain sent the leader of the fleet a message. He said, in the event of our being attacked, we intend to remain on the surface. And back came the answer, so do we all. Congratulations. see you in Murmansk. And in point of fact, when the submarine reached its halfway point, they obviously thought better of it. It just wasn't fit for purpose. So they told it to turn around and accompany a convoy that was coming back from Russia. And that they did. And that's what Alec counts as his half a convoy. When he talks about 10.5 convoys, that's his half a convoy. But when he came back, he was then told to go off to Harland and Wolff, where the government had taken over what was going to be a cargo ship and were turning it into an escort carrier, which I've got a picture of, if I can. And now that escort carrier was HMS Campania. and it had a crew of 700. It had about 18 planes on board, which were Wildcats or,
Swordfish.
thank you, Swordfish. And Alec was sent over to make sure his stuff was installed properly, down 27 feet below water level. And so he went there. And they weren't very pleased, the naval chaps, to discover that it was being built in the same slipway as the Titanic had been built. They're very superstitious. And there was a notice in the room which said, in the event of the ship being damaged, take the bolt cutters and cut away the secret equipment that's under the ship so it's not captured. There's a grenade here, and if you pull the pin out, throw it at the equipment to destroy it so it can't be captured. And you've got 7 seconds to get out. Several of the men. And Alec said they all talked amongst themselves and decided they'd rather go with the grenade than freeze to death in the Arctic. In the early days in the Arctic, I'm going to tell you what were called one-shot Johnnies. In the very early days, it started in 1941, the Convoys, finished in 1945. They hadn't got enough aircraft carriers to give air cover for them. So what they did was they put Hurricanes on like a catapult, so that if a U-boat was spotted or German planes were spotted, you could fire off the Hurricane and off it would go and fight and deal with them. That was the good news. Bad news was, couldn't get back. What the pilot had to do was to try and land as near his ship as possible, or a ship as possible, dive into the water and hope he was rescued within 2 or 3 minutes. And a lot of them weren't. But Alec recalls one instance where they did get to the chap, they got him into the boat, rescue boat, they took him back to his ship, and then announced to his ship that they wouldn't let him go back on board unless they were given a side of bacon. And the side of bacon was lowered down, and up went the pilot. Now, the Campania was commissioned in 1943, and did a few runs down to Africa escorting fleets. And then Alec was in Scotland at the beginning of June, when they were suddenly told they were sailing. Nobody told them where he was going. They said nobody ever told them where they were going. And off they went, and they sailed down, and it was only some time later that somebody said, I tell you what, we're off the Isle of Wight. I've just seen the Needles. And they were in Sandown Bay. And Alec said when you looked out, as far as you could see were ships all over the place. And it became obvious that this was going to be D-Day. Alec and the others had believed that the invasion was going to come through Norway. I think our government had done lots of things to indicate Norway was to throw the Germans off the scent. The weather was awful, absolutely appalling. So it put D-Day should have been the 5th of June, but they put it back 24 hours. And Alec said he felt very sorry for the soldiers who were in the landing craft, were they?
Sorry?
Were the soldiers in Sandown Bay in the landing craft?
They were ready to land, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he said they were being...
Mountainous waves.
Yeah. He said a lot of them were being terribly seasick. But that night they sailed. And Alec's ship is not part of the official D-Day Armada, but what he was called cover force, where they would draw a ship from somewhere else to do a specific job. And his job when they got over there was to go to the U-boat pen at Brest and to sit outside and make sure the U-boats didn't come out. Because if the U-boats had come out while all our ships were there and we were landing, it would have been chaos. And they sat there and they did it. And a U-boat, if it wanted to come out, would have to come out on the surface before it dived. And they sat there just waiting, and there was no U-boat trying to come out. which was of great value to the invasion. And they were there for some time whilst the beachhead was established. And then they were given a new order. There was a tug they had to go and protect. So off Alec went, and he saw this tug with a giant, he describes it like a cotton reel, chugging along. And it was laying the Pluto pipeline. And Alec said, I asked him, if I detect a submarine, a U-boat, what are we to do about it? And they said, oh well, we don't want any depth charges dropped. Just throw a grenade over and try to scare it off. And it was only later that Alec realised that it was the pipeline being laid from either Shanklin Chine or Sandown Golf Course both. And he was there for several days guarding that. And then they went off back home. And then came the 10 Arctic convoys. And one trip that's one convoy, back is 2 convoys. And he did 10 of those. So I just want to get the order of my stories. Yes. On one occasion, they were escorting merchant ships, and Alec was sitting with his headphones on, and he heard a sound he'd never heard before. He'd only ever heard it in training. It was the sound of a torpedo coming towards them, and it was about 2,500 yards. And he listened, and it got louder and louder and louder. And they had a pen that marked how far away things were. And he thought, we've had it. And it got louder and louder, and he took his headphones off, because if there was going to be an explosion, it would blow his eardrums. When they dropped depth charges, or there were loud noises, you had to take your headphones off. And he took his headphones off, and he sat there. And in his mind, he could see the torpedo coming through the side of the ship and exploding. And then suddenly, it got fainter. And they calculate that the torpedo had passed 6 feet under their ship and hit a merchant ship just beyond them. And then he heard a second torpedo, and that one missed altogether. But he thought to himself, you know, somebody up there's looking after me if I've got through this. So let's just see where I go from here. Oh yes, slightly lighter note. Alec had a run-in with a KGB man, and he said that the Russians didn't treat them very well when they arrived. They were very suspicious of them. They didn't realise what they'd gone through, and he called them the overcoats. He said you could always tell as a KGB man, because he had a long overcoat, and it was one size fits all. It didn't matter whether he was 6'3" or 5'8". He still had the same length of overcoat. And the hospitals in Murmansk and Archangel were desperately short of medicines. And when the ship was going to sail, what they'd do was they'd go around and collect the medicines and take them to the nearby hospital. And Alec was entrusted with that, and he was supposed to go with an officer, so all they did was put an officer's hat on anybody's head who was the officer accompanying him. And he came down the gangplank with what are called M&B tablets, May and Butler, which are penicillin for gangrene and which come from frostbite and things. So Alec came down the gangway with this supposed officer, and the guard at the bottom of this gangway said, inspected the bag they got and gave it back to Alec. And then a KGB man stepped forward and opened up and started taking out the M&B tablets, putting them in his pocket. And Alec went to say something, and the chap with him gave him a look, said, "Don't say a word." And off went the KGB. Off they went. And a little while later, the same thing was going to happen again. They said to Alec, "We've got to deliver some M&B tablets to the hospital." And Alec said, "Can you take them out of their packets?" And he said, "Yeah, I can do." He took them, he put them in his pocket. He said, give me some other tablets to put in there, so put other tablets. So he walked down the gangway, same thing happened again. KGB man.
Ladies and gentlemen, there were number 9s.
Yeah, I'll come to that in a minute, Alec. I think that was going to be my punchline. So the KGB man took what he thought was the M&B out again, put them in his pocket, and off he went. And of course what Alec had put in were tablets for constipation. And he said, I never saw that KGB man.
Apologise, you did well.
There were some terrible storms. They got caught in absolutely terrible storms. And the worst storm they got caught up in was a force 15. And when Alex said a force 15, I thought, he's got that wrong. Force 12. And I looked it up, and there is a force 15. And they left Murmansk, and they were a day or two out of Murmansk, and this terrible storm came. The ship hove to, and they kept the engines running to try and keep them away from the Norwegian coast. But it was so strong, it was pushing them towards the Norwegian coast. This went on for 3 days, and in fact, in Alec's scrapbook, you've got the national report of this terrible storm, and it was by Godfrey Wynne, who was on board, who was a BBC reporter at the time. And after 2 or 3 days, the captain said, I think there's going to be a lull. What we'll do is we'll swing the ship round and try and get going. And they started to swing the ship, and it got hit. I mean, the waves up to then had been sort of 40, 50 foot. And as they moved the ship, and I should have said, the ship is 16,000 tons. As they started to turn the ship, it was hit by a monstrous wave, about 90 foot, and the ship went right over. And it went over 45 degrees, although Alec was told some years later it was actually 48 degrees by someone who knew. The wind indicator disappeared. The doors on the what were they called?
Embarkation space.
The embarkation doors.
Just underneath the flight deck.
They got sheared off. So did some of the lockers. Alec, in the meantime, they told everybody to lash themselves down. So Alec had gone downstairs. He put his life jacket on and a coat on. He slung his hammock, and he was up there and thought, well, that's the best I can do. And as this wave came down, one of the chaps on the deck came down with it, crashed down, and a Russian, he's feeding me exhibits down. There's a Russian child who heard the story when he visited Murmansk in 2005, sent him this picture. It's him in his hand. Alec thought the chap was dead, and the ship rolled violently, and about 2 feet of water, ice cold water, was swishing around. The petrol started to escape from somewhere, and then a ventilator fan caught fire. And Alec thought, it's about time I got out. Yeah. So he got down, and as he did, the chap came past him, and he grabbed him by the neck. And the ship rolled so much, it carried him up the ladder to the deck. And another chap grabbed him, and they took him. And Alec thought, they took him to the sick bay, but Alec thought he was dead. And that was the end of it. In 2013, Alec got a letter from someone with a copy of a hurt and wound certificate. It was the son of the person he'd saved. He'd had a fractured skull, but he'd lived. And the son, he'd lived, but then just after the war was in a cycle accident and was killed. And the son was trying to trace. And all he had was Alec's name on this hurt and wound certificate. But where he's got a fairly unusual name, he said, are you the Alec Penstone on the hurt and wound certificate? And Alec said, yes, I am. So they talked for a bit, And the chap is Jim, isn't he? He's a medic in Aberdeen. And he got on his motorbike and drove all the way down to the Isle of Wight to meet Alec. And they've stayed in touch ever since, haven't they? See. Now I'll tell you about Soroya Island. It's a Norwegian island, and when the troops were in Murmansk, they got word that the Germans near the end of the war were planning to take 500 Norwegians over to Berlin to use them as a human wall to stop the Russians approaching. And of course Alec said, have you seen the Russians? He said they just, they've taken no notice. So they decided to go over, and Alec was part of, you were on one of the party, weren't you, Alec, that went over? Soroya Island.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Alec was, and they got over there, and they fired a very pistol, and all these people came pouring down out of the forest where they'd been hiding from the Germans. And they got them all back, took them back to Russia. Russians wouldn't let them land. They didn't have passports. So they had to put them out amongst the merchant ships because they couldn't stay on the warships. And they all set off. And one of the ships, which became famous, was the Henry Bacon. And they were on their way, and the Henry Bacon developed engine trouble. Couldn't go any further. So the rest of the fleet went on without realising it. And the Germans came in and used them as bombing factors. And lots of German planes came in dropping bombs. The crew were Lascars from Madagascar. And Alec is full of admiration for them. A few Lascars got into the lifeboats, but a lot of them went down with the ship. They gave up their places. And the oldest person, Norwegian, that was rescued was a lady of 86. And the youngest was a child that had just been born. And in the 1970s, Alec was part of what was called the North Russian Club, of all the Arctic people getting together. And they all talked about it, and talked about this girl, and they said, you should be a woman now. Let's put an advert in the Norwegian press, see if we can find her. So they did, and she came forward. And they paid for her to come over to England and have a holiday. She met them all, and I think had got a child of her own by that time. But it's a rather nice end to a particular story. The next one I'm going to tell you, I wasn't going to include, but Alec said to me, are you going to tell them about the two liners? I said, well, I wasn't going to. He said, I wish you would. So I'm telling you this one at his specific request. After the war was finished, Alec's ship was asked to...
Excuse me. No, after D-Day. It was after D-Day.
Yeah, but how could they get him out of...
It was after D-Day when we freed some of the Russians from a labour camp.
Okay.
Jumped back to England.
Yeah, okay. They came back to England. Stalin wanted them back. Churchill didn't. There were 1,100. Men, women and children. Churchill didn't like the sound of it, didn't want to send them back. But Stalin insisted. Heroes of the Soviet Union would be. So Alec's ship was asked to escort the two liners, the Empress of Australia and the Scythia, which they did. And they could see all these people standing on the decks, all dressed in khaki uniforms. And they thought they were sailors, and they waved to them from their ship, but they didn't wave back. And the sailors just thought no more of it. They got to Russia, and they got to the Kola Inlet at Murmansk. And the Campania stayed offshore, about a mile away from the liners. And they saw the Russians coming out, pulling great big squares, each one of which would take about 100 people. And then they saw some of the Russians starting to jump off the ship and try to swim away. And they realised to their horror that as heroes of the Soviet Union they weren't. And the English sailors got binoculars, could see what was happening. The Russians were going around clubbing people in the water and pulling them back on board, and they got them all to Murmansk. And it was only in the 1970s that the mass graves of all those people were discovered. The English sailors, it was almost a mutiny. The English sailors were so upset at what had happened. It was almost a mutiny. And they said, we'll never do that again. And it was never done again. And the story of those two liners and those 1,100 poor souls is one of the big stains and scandals of the Second World War. Let me try and show you the photos now. That's the Campania. That's a Wildcat, July 44, so it's just after D-Day. I'm not sure everybody can see.
Thank you.
That's the ice we're talking about. That's a gun turret, completely iced up. That's what they call pancake ice. That's Kola Inlet, February 1945. That's Alec and his beloved Gladys, who were married for 76 years. And Alec left, Gladys left us a couple of years ago. There's Alec with his medals and the book. And talking to the King. That's 2019. And there's a couple of, I'm going to finish with a couple of stories from the 75th anniversary of D-Day, when Alec and George went on the Boudica, small cruise ship, backwards and forwards to France for a week. And there was you may remember, there was a big ceremony on South Sea Common, where the Queen was there, Trump was there. I said to George, what did you think of Trump? He said he was bright orange. He said Melania was beautiful. But they were sitting in the marquee, and Alec was sitting as much as he is now. And two aides of the Prime Minister, which was Theresa May at the time, came over to him and said, would you like to meet the Prime Minister? And Alec said, no thank you. He said, why not? She's not my flavour. So he sat there for a bit longer, and over came Theresa May. She said, I hear you didn't want to meet me. That's right. Why is that? Well, you're not my colour, and you haven't got Brexit done quickly enough. She said, well, I've done my best. She said, not good enough. And the next day, when they were over in France, she came over with her husband, Philip, and they sat and had a pot of tea together and all chatted away quite happily. So the final anecdote, if you like, it relates to that week. When George and Alec got on the Boudica, they went to their cabin, and then he said, well, let's go upstairs and see what's happening. So they went upstairs. This is what I call a can you spot the celebrity contest. And they went upstairs, standing on the deck, and up came a chap to Alec. And he said, oh, I've been looking forward to meeting you so much. Alec said, thank you. And, and chatted to him and all enthusiastic. And meet my wife. The wife came over. She said, he's been looking forward to seeing you so much. And Alec said, well, yes. They chatted for a few more minutes. And the wife said, can we have a photo with you? And Alec said, yes, he's quite used to it, actually. So the celebrity put his arm around him, beaming away, thrilled to pieces, and Alec, looking slightly bemused, not quite sure what's happening. And they said, well, we've got to go now, and off they went. And that photo later appeared in Hello magazine. Hello magazine. And as they disappeared, Alec turned to George, he said, who is that bloke? see if anybody can spot who it was. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, Alec Penstone.
Very warm reception, and also for your patience in listening to what went on. But I've got a few bits and pieces up here which you may be interested in. I've also got here, which is signed by Putin himself as a bravery award when he gave me the Medal of Yashakov, and I know what I'd like to do with it now. Sure. And it's signed by Putin, so I've got to give it all up, but I was told not to, because the Russian people gave me these medals, not the government, and I'm told that it might come in handy in later life. There's some bits and pieces here that you were more than willing to have a look at. This was what the one that the the French
Legion d'honneur.
one. Pardon?
Legion d'honneur.
Yeah, that's it, what she said. I don't speak French anyway. That's because they couldn't engrave the medal. They engrave it inside the box. So, but you're more than welcome to come and have a look. And this is, of course, what I was talking about. This is an actual picture painted by a Russian boy, because when the museum opened in Locklew, we used to send various stories up there just to go in the museum. And one of them was about this, when I got hold of his dad and I pulled him out of the water. I thought he was dead. But anyway, what about it was, his son managed to find me, and a little Russian boy won first prize in painting that, and it was presented to me.
If anybody's got any questions, please just put your hand up and say it. And secondly, when we have finished, you're very welcome to come up and shake hands with Alec, have a chat with him, or have a selfie taken with him. He's quite used to it. As you may have gathered, he's rather chatty anyway. So has anybody got any questions? Jolly good.
James, thank you. I'm going to ask Felix, who's going to stand up and say a few words, who's one of our past Commodores and quite a celebrity in the club. Felix?
Well, that's quite an introduction. Usually you do this job. I think,
Called designation.
if I may say so, how do you follow a presentation like that? We are in the presence this evening of somebody truly remarkable. I'm a post-war babe. I didn't experience any of the sort of thing that you obviously went through. And it's truly remarkable that you got through it, that you've survived, and you're so fit and healthy. All of those medals, I'm surprised you can still stand up. I was brought up on a diet of Jack Hawkins and the Cruel Sea, and I saw that programme that Jeremy Clarkson produced on PQ-17, and that gave a kind of flavour of the kind of weather that you must have experienced in your time. I'm a sailor, but I certainly wouldn't want to go anywhere near anything like that. I think it's a truly remarkable story. I'm very glad that you've got a book, because it needs to be preserved, because people like me, who didn't live through it, need to be reminded of how great the sacrifice was of you and your comrades over those years.
Well,
So,
I mean, we've often been called heroes, but I can assure you I've never kicked a football or rode in an open top bus. My heroes are all in the Arctic or in Normandy. They are the real heroes. I'm just one of the lucky ones. I managed to stay safe and come back. And for that I'm eternally grateful. And to all my wonderful friends who've made my life such a happy one since my wife died. I've been 77 years married to the most wonderful lady in the world, and she decided it was time to go 2 years ago, and I'm still here. But for that, I thank my lucky stars and my wonderful friends for taking a part of my history, and I really appreciate it. After my marriage, I was on my way out to the Far East. Because what happened, it's going to be a future story, I've been told.
Carry on.
All right, but anyway, 2 days after my marriage, I was on my way out to the Far East, and I was granted permission to marry my lovely wife, because we were both minors, by a special Archbishop of Canterbury gave us special permission, and I got a magnificent parchment signed by him, because she wanted her mum and dad there, and I was happy to marry her because we were both minors. They said, that we could get her mum and dad there in the chapel, and we could get married in 3 hours' notice in any Church of England church, and the vicar has got to do as he's told.
When you started, we were told this was a mundane story. It was anything but. And I think we've been truly privileged to hear of your exploits tonight. And I'm going to change the tradition. Can we have 3 cheers for Alec? Hip hip! Hooray! Hip hip! Hooray! Hip hip! Hooray!
Can I just ask one question? I forgot when the questions were being asked. How, in the appalling conditions of the Arctic Circle there, how did you stop getting frostbite?
How did you stop getting frostbite in the appalling conditions of the Arctic?
We just had to be very, very careful. Never touch any steel work or anything. Never get, we always had to wear gloves. I mean, I was one of the lucky ones. I was down below in the cabinet, and the ship's sides was there covered in ice, and you could hear a mine or the ice scraping alongside, because we were 27 foot below the waterline, and you always had to wait for the bang, or if it was ice, then you were lucky.
But you had to scrape the ice off every day, didn't you?
You had to scrape the ice off every day.
Oh yes, yes, yes. That's otherwise you turn turtle.
Yeah.
You wait the ice on it. I mean, why we didn't turn over when we rolled 48 degrees, I don't know. But at that time, we were just taking our lucky stars. It was only cold water coming in.
There we are.